Thank you for joining us today, Ryan, and all of you, as we journey to find the uncommon truth about leadership. We're going to discuss the character of a leader, how leaders are agents of change, and how important is vision, purpose, and planning to leadership. And I'm going to start it with a quote by Miles Monroe. And he said, the beliefs of structure of a person are really critical because leaders have belief in themselves, and then they are the initiators, which creates, unfortunately, sometimes enemies and resistance because they upset the status quo. But they're doing this because they have a vision. They have a purpose that they're focused on. So for leadership, how important are vision, purpose, and ultimately the rituals or habits that they live by?
Whether you're making change in your own life or you're making change in an organization, there's battles to be fought. And sometimes they're battles with other people. Sometimes they're, a lot of times they're battles, mental battles with yourself. Having clear vision, having clear purpose, and establishing a series of habits or rituals that move you forward in any areas that you need to move forward as a leader is very, very helpful to you actually in picking the right battles, engaging the battle strategically, and then being persistent enough and wise enough to get through them and win them and bring people on board. Bring people on board rather than create more animosity and more hostility as you go forward. Really difficult things. Yeah. Leadership is not for some people because they don't want the battles. They don't want to face those challenges in life. But I would say that it's important. It's important for people to take a look at that and say, I've got some battles to fight. I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. So we try to frame it this way, after 25 years of, working with and being around and then training, corporate leaders, we try to frame it this way. Basically, organizations come down to two types of people: leaders leading leaders and leaders following leaders. Those are the two options in corporations. At the NHL as a team, and I would like to say even in family. I look at, instead of looking at leadership as a position, I like this idea of leadership as a plural opportunity for growth. And in this context, at one point in our lives, we are going to lead. And so growing the leadership capacity of every person in the organization. Now, they might not want to be a leader. They might not like to see themselves as accountable. But at the end of the day in 2020, there is no out. Even the person on the phone at the front of the office at one point has the client on the phone and is in charge of the whole account, right? So I like this idea of where we're going is that there's no option. Leadership capacity growth is for every person, not just for executives. And if we can have that focus, then we see leadership. Posner and Kuzers have done a lot of research on leadership, and in back a little while, they most people would see leadership as a personality style. Their point is it's not. Leadership is skills to be developed, right, and characteristics and values and inner game stuff that can be grown. So that's really encouraging for me, and I don't think leadership is this thing that, is esoteric and it's out there and people say, well, that guy came out of the womb as a leader. That person may have come out of the womb a little farther along, as a leader, but every leader I've ever met is on a growth path and has chosen to grow. So, yeah, I think we're bringing, Heath, I'll come back to you. I think we're bringing everything sort of into focus around leadership, and I think it's a fun discussion to have.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this because, I really like what you just said, that leadership applies to all of us, as life requires us to lead at different times, whether it's as a father, a mother, a team lead in an organization, a supervisor. It could be simply as a student in a class by putting their hand up to ask the question that everyone else wants to ask. It really comes down to what you really said, and I think it's powerful. The two options of leadership: to either be a leader, leading leaders, or to be a leader, following leaders. It's wisdom to know which one to do at the right time. Oh, along the line of vision, of purpose, of those rituals and habits that we do that drive the results that we get, right? And planning is so critical in this. We can predict our future by creating it. And that's really what leaders do. They say, you know what? I'm going there. And they do what Benjamin Franklin said. They plan, because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So how do we create a good plan and a culture that's going to sort of wrap up this discussion of leadership and managing change, right? So how do we really create that culture and that team environment? Because that's really what leadership is. Otherwise, we're on a walk by ourselves, and embrace the change that's required for us to lead.
Yeah, we do a couple of pieces that we think are powerful, and this is a huge learning from me. When I was with the Washington Capitals, I'm drafted number 2 in the world of the Caps. So as both of you know, that means they're not a very good team, right? They're the second worst team in the NHL that year. Here's my point, is in Washington, we were a young startup company with not enough skill to really play against the big boys. So we lost a lot. And here's what I learned, because I experienced that. Let me take you inside an NHL dressing room. I found that the common cultural language, if I was to put it all together, came together around this idea of blame. So the idea of blame. So, if we couldn't blame the goalie for the loss, we'd blame the referee for the loss. And what we find is that there's a lot of culture that is formed on the language of blame. And if the problem with blame is that everything we've just talked about goes away from a growth point of view, from a development point of view, from a holding myself accountable point of view, if I can turn and blame someone else. So there is no growth in blame cultures. Then I get traded to the Montreal Canadiens, and by the way, I'm not throwing my guys under the bus in Washington. I mean, I was in year 2, I was captain of that mess. We were trying to turn the culture. I get traded to the Canadiens, who had just came off 6 Stanley Cup wins in 10 seasons when I got there. And the common cultural language in that dressing room was much different. That was a team that won a lot. That was a team that, was in the playoffs all the time. And in 9 seasons with the Montreal Canadiens, we went to, 2 Stanley Cup finals. So the common cultural language in that dressing room was built around, or at least this is what I remember, we weren't perfect, but it was built around this idea of no excuses. So the words I remember were just find a way to win. So just find a solution. So just find a way to win. And that changed everything. So now, instead of being able to turn and blame the referee, now I was actually accountable for my actions towards, not only in the concept of the team, but with the coaching staff and with management. Here's my summary on everything I've learned at the NHL level around culture. And we have processes that we help organizations put in place. But here it is: culture turns on language. That's it. If you want to know the future of your business, look at the language of your business. You want to know the future of a person, look at the language that they say to themselves. This idea is that the language is the glue, and it's the outpouring of belief system. It's the outpouring of mindset. It's the outpouring of action. And it's the glue that leaders can really influence. So the great leaders, whether they know it and they do it intentionally, or they don't know it and they're just doing it, always influence the language of the culture. And that's not always positive.
Yeah, this is, you just really hit on the overall mindset triad is the wording that I would use that in your story we're talking about. It comes back to those three things, and language and self-talk is one of the three critical aspects of our mindset and our state. That language that we use actually shows our beliefs and what's in our heart. And the days that I'm Mr. Grumpy Pants and it's coming out, whether it be in personal relationships or business, is showing where I'm at in my state. And I get to choose what that is, right? So I am accountable, and it's our choice to whether be a victim, fall below the line and go, well, the blame game that you just said, or if it's going to be, it's up to me, which is a accountable statement to start with self first and really change our focus. Because when we start to change our focus on what we focus on, that tells us what we're going to feel. That feeling's going to grow, then we ultimately become it. And then it goes into our language, and because we've set a belief by our focus. And then obviously, lastly, the physiology of what we do with that language is a really critical element to managing our state. And ultimately, state is culture, whether it be individually, my personal culture inside myself, or in the team, in the dressing room of the Washington Capitals. As a leader, which you've been throughout your hockey career, your business career, and in my experience with you, that's something that I really can say, yeah, I've observed that in you, and I've learned it is accountability. And that you really inspire people by doing what you say. That's true leadership. Back to the very beginning of our whole discussion. Right? And that, I think this is really critical. What do you think, Bob?
Love the discussion, gents. Thanks so much. Just to build a bit on what was said before by Ryan, the language that we say to ourselves, the language that the team uses is so important. That just leads me to think that the people that we have around us that are speaking languages are really important too. So the story that Ryan told about the two hockey teams, someone had pulled together the team and they were all speaking the same language to build that culture, right? And that's management, and that's leadership coming together. And what an interesting thing if you would have got a chance to stay with Washington, right? Because they became a very good team, 20 years later. They did, over time, change the culture and change the language of that team by moving out people, bringing in people, right? When you're in an organization, you don't have the opportunity to move people out. You really do have to change mindsets, and you really do have to change their language. And that is a tall order, but it starts with self. It starts with you understanding that, and you having the confidence to move forward. And the hint that I would give to other people is you've got to bring like people on board. So I was in an organization of over 100 employees leading that organization, and the culture needed to be changed. And that's immediately what I did, was reach out and bring people, 2 or 3 key people on at the senior management level out of, let's say, 10. And then one by one, we started to change language and change mindset through the process of discussions and encouragement and training and going to conferences together and bringing people on and forming that cohort of like-minded people who could then influence others around them. And that was a 7-year passionate growth period for everybody. Very exciting. Changing the culture, changing the mindsets of a family, a hockey team, a business department, or a whole organization.
We have our little model talks about, future positive vision. Leaders are through their language and through their, obviously you have to do it first. And, this comes back to what we do and what we say. But leaders really give direction to companies and cultures. And that is a fun thing to do, because you see people come alongside and you see people, after a while decide that this is real and that they're going to be part of it. And I love that idea, because leadership's not about us, right? Leadership doesn't have ego. Let me reverse that. Everybody has ego, but leadership has enough of the good side of the ego to say that, it's not about me. It's not about, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. Leadership is about a movement. It's about taking people in a direction. And so I love that thought. And that's where language is so important. I listen in now. You guys will laugh at me. I had a buddy of mine that kept saying, he's standing in front of his wife and he kept saying, my kids, my kids, my kids. And I finally turned to him and I said, I think she bore the kids. Like it's not my kids, it's our kids. And your viewers might think that that's such a small piece, and it is. And I'm jumping on my buddy. But here's the point: language counts, right? What was she thinking when he was saying my kids? So this is a powerful place for leadership to be very self-aware and understanding that their language has impact. And it's a great place to play out leadership, because you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it immediately. And Heath, I'm looking forward to our next session together.
Yes, I really want to thank you both for this great discussion.